plans to stand on a corner near the Justice Center, talk with protesters, and try and help break the 2-month stalemate downtown.
Well, welcome aboard, Ted. We'll be happy to see you.
Meanwhile, I talked to his opponent for mayor, Sarah Iannarone, who's been a common sight at these protests. And if somebody accuses a police officer of misconduct, then what happens?
The vast majority of them cannot be made public.
In a lot of cases, we may never know. We'll tell you why that is. Here's the story.
I'm Dan Haggerty. Welcome to The Story. We have so much to talk about. I actually just spent a little bit too much time on that, so to be honest, I think we're a little behind schedule. So please keep the comments coming on Twitter. Use the hashtag HeyDan. Email us at thestory@kgw.com. As I said, we got a lot to get into, so let's jump right into it. See, last night we led things off with a question. Who do you believe when it comes to what's happening downtown? The story of what's happening in downtown Portland is being told two different ways, I think. And at some point, it comes down to who do you believe? So do you believe the feds, what they say, and they had probable cause, or do you believe the folks who say that they're lying? Because at this point right now, we really don't have any hard evidence that either are true yet. But it is so after the coverage, this morning we got an email from a viewer named Lynn Coleman, and it was kind of a perfectly crafted email, if you ask me, because in it, Lynn asked all the questions pertinent to figuring out who to believe. The federal government, who says that they are arresting people based on probable cause, or others who say the feds just can't be trusted. So I want to read Lynn's email and answer what we can and let you know what we don't know. But she starts by referencing a well-known arrest, saying, I've only seen video of one such incident, and I've seen it many, many times. How many such incidents have there been? See, Lynn is referring to this video, which we are going to show you once more now. The man in black there, who OPB identified as Mark Pettibone, gets arrested by Customs and Border Patrol and put into an unmarked SUV. And Lynn, you are right. We have been treating Pettibone's arrest as kind of a case study of this entire question, because it really was the very first, I think, incident, and certainly the first video to really blow up. But Pettibone isn't the only person who the feds have arrested. See, the U.S. Attorney's Office told us today there have been 42 federal arrests as of this morning. And of those 42, 26 are facing federal charges. 2 were cited with misdemeanors, 12 were released with no charges, and 2 are still pending investigation. Which kind of brings us to the next part of Lynn's question. Lynn said, I have also heard that these people were detained for some period of time, released, and that there is no record of an arrest or detention. So there are two things to consider here. First, we know that 12 people have been arrested but not charged, and that there is a record of that. But it gets a little trickier when you consider what we might not know. See, hypothetically, could the feds arrest you, say they had probable cause, detain you for a couple days, and then release you without charges? Lewis and Clark law professor Tung Yin told me, yes.
But what happens if the officers don't really care if the case is prosecuted, if they just want to grab the person off the street and make life kind of unpleasant for them for up to 72 hours, and then at the end of that say, we changed our minds, we're not going to charge you, you can go now. Then the magistrate never gets involved. All that happens is the person's been locked up for up to 3 days. Now, they might be able to bring a civil rights lawsuit, but those are hard to win, and you have to find a lawyer who will represent you, and so there are some challenges there as well.
Now, Yin also told me that anyone who is taken into custody should have a paper trail, whether you see a magistrate or not. But let's talk about the people who are arrested and actually charged. See, today the U.S. Attorney's Office said that these 7 people were charged just last night. 5 of them are from the area, the other 2 are not. They were charged with crimes varying from failure to comply to arson to assaulting a federal officer. So we know some details about those people, but we still really don't know much at all about the people who were arrested but not charged. Like, what was the probable cause in their arrest? Or did officers actually have probable cause in those cases? Because we are getting some mixed messages on that front. See, yesterday on Fox News, Acting Secretary Wolf said this: because we don't have that local support, that local law enforcement support, we are having to go out and proactively arrest individuals. And we need to do that because we need to hold them accountable. But we heard a different message entirely during the Secretary's press conference.
The individual that they were questioning was in a crowd and in an area where an individual was aiming a laser at the eyes of officers. We have people in the area that observe, keep track of him, where he's going. We don't want to go in the crowd because then it's a fight between our guys and the demonstrators. So we wait till the individual gets into a somewhat quiet area, where we don't expect to have violence when we want to talk to him. In this instance, the CBP officers approached him, and you saw the approach. It was peaceful. There was no tackle. There was no get on the ground. They wanted to talk to him. But as they approached him, they noticed that coming in their direction were violent demonstrators that now see what's going on and they want to go help. So they asked the individual, please get in the van, and they did take them to an area that was safe for both the officers and the individual to do the questioning.
They say their probable cause for arresting Pettibone was that he was in the same area as somebody shooting a laser in the eyes of federal agents. You heard it there. So, Lynn, I hope that you feel like we clarified some of your questions, and I hope that you believe that we are working hard behind the scenes to answer the rest of them. But it does take time, takes some patience for everybody, but eventually everything does come out if you look hard enough. And with that, that takes us to our big story, which is all about police accountability. It kind of boils down to a simple question. What happens when Portland police officers are accused of misconduct? Now, what we can't tell you is the people in charge of vetting those claims are busier than ever. They're dealing with years worth of work. But they also told Maggie Vespa, you're probably going to be disappointed if you were hoping to actually know the results. I chatted with Maggie earlier about why they rarely see the light of day. Okay, Maggie Vespa joining us now. A lot of layers to this conversation. Let's start at the beginning. You started looking into this issue because of an instance that happened right at the beginning of all of these protests.
Exactly. It happened in early June, which we know at this point feels like a lifetime ago. And a lot, by the way, has happened since then, much of it more violent than what we're about to show you and remind you of. But this video basically got a lot of attention online, and we promised we would stay on it. So we definitely want to do that. I'll show you the video again just to refresh everybody's memory. This is the clip. It's a view from Sky 8, and it shows a Portland Police Bureau SUV accelerating into an intersection where protesters were moving barricades around, and you can see the protesters have to kind of get out of the way pretty quickly. In the days after this happened, then Police Chief Jamie Resch, who has since stepped down, promised an investigation into this. That then catapulted that video over to Portland's Independent Police Review, which exists under the umbrella of the City Auditor's Office. So it's separate from the Police Bureau, separate from the Mayor's Office, and we got an update from them on this investigation. The update is rather minimal. The director told us they are, quote, very aware of that video. They have identified the Portland police officer who was driving that SUV. He said they have not heard from anyone who was in the intersection that night in that video, and they would still very much like to. They also said this investigation could go on a while longer because a lot of times these cases take months. I want to point out that we reached out to the Portland Police Bureau about our entire story tonight and about that video and the investigation into it. And in particular, I asked if that officer is still working while the investigation is ongoing and if they're still working at protests. We haven't yet heard back from the Bureau. We'll let everybody know if and when we do.
Got it. Now, the source that we have, the person giving us the information is the director of IPR, a guy named Ross Caldwell. And I know we reached out to him about this investigation, specifically about this video, but you learned a lot more during that discussion, right?
We did. And, you know, in short, amid these protests, and this is no surprise, IPR is investigating more misconduct claims against Portland police than they ever have. Caldwell, given that, wanted people to understand more about why they rarely hear the outcomes of these investigations. That, in the past, has been a big criticism of IPR, of the Police Bureau, and frankly, of the city in general. And Caldwell was really blunt in our interview that he wants that to change.
Yeah, it's a few years worth of work.
Ross Caldwell, director of Portland's Independent Police Review, says his staff of about 15 people has narrowed thousands of calls about police misconduct to more than 75 active investigations and counting. Most of them, of course, are tied to the nightly protests playing out in Portland, a reaction to George Floyd's murder. A normal investigation during normal times takes months, he says. They're working to get through these as fast as possible. Meanwhile, Caldwell understands a lot of people may be watching this process for the very first time. So he asked us to pass this message along about the outcomes of these investigations.
The vast majority of them cannot be made public.
Caldwell says, simply put, there are legal, tangible barriers in place that keep the public from knowing whether a Portland police officer has been disciplined. He pointed to 2 state statutes in particular that say these findings don't have to be released under public records laws except for in certain cases, including when the public interest requires disclosure. Now, you would think that exception would be enough for a lot of these cases to be released, but Caldwell says that phrase is so vague that it's been interpreted a number of ways by attorneys and judges. As a result, it's often not strong enough to stand up to a second barrier. That is the current Portland Police Association contract. In the section pertaining to discipline, the contract reads, if the city has reason to reprimand or discipline an officer, it shall be done in a manner that is least likely to embarrass the officer before other officers or the public. Caldwell says in his experience, that clause has been enough to keep disciplinary decisions ultimately made by the police chief and police commissioner, a.k.a. Mayor Ted Wheeler, under wraps. And Caldwell has something to say about that.
That's one of the biggest problems that we have. And that's something that, that we are, I think, internally are very frustrated by. And those are not decisions that we make. We don't get to decide what gets made public. We're city employees. People should be able to see what our work looks like, and we shouldn't be asking people to take our word for it that we're doing a good job. They should be able to see our investigations.
Now, we should point out this does not apply to officers who are fired for cause because of their misconduct. If and when that happens, an officer's name and details surrounding that go into a newly public state database, and we have info on that database online. We reached out to the Portland Police Association and the mayor's office about this story. Both declined to comment on this story at this time. And remember, this Portland Police Association labor agreement, this union contract, was just up for renegotiation, and basically the city and the union agreed to kick the can down the road until next summer, extend it for 1 year. So this language, all the language in that labor agreement, has been reviewed recently. So we are hoping to hear from city officials about this. We just basically haven't yet.
I hope that a lot of the people that have been emailing us, making sure that we're following up on some of these incidents and wanting to touch base and get the facts behind them, that they see how long the process actually takes. And I do want to be specific in explaining to them that IPR handles the city police investigations, and they really can't touch misconduct claims from any other agencies. And when you take the kind of cocktail that we're dealing with right now with all of the different agencies involved, we just heard from DHS yesterday. We know how difficult it's going to be to get all of the information from all of the different agencies about all of these different specific incidents.
Exactly. I mean, yesterday, acting Homeland Security Secretary Chad Wolf was asked about some of the tactics and some of the violence that we've seen at the hands of federal officers here in Portland. And in particular, reporters asked him about this video of an officer beating a Navy veteran with his baton, and then you see another pepper spray him in the face. That veteran's name is Chris David. He talked to Kyla Boshi. He has a broken hand as a result of all of this. Secretary Wolf was asked about this, about what's being done, and he basically said he couldn't comment because it's not his agency. That officer, he said, was a U.S. Marshal, meaning the Department of Justice will be investigating that incident. And at this point, that's really all we've been able to find out about that incident. Nothing about the case, nothing about the name of the officer, nothing about the process of the investigation and what kind of timeline we can expect. And we're still digging by all means. But, this issue, Dan, of just sort of transparency, especially between agencies. And as you said, we have this combination of officers from multiple agencies, from multiple levels of government in Portland. It has, we've seen so many barriers in regards to transparency when we've tried to dig into follow-ups to the incidents that we're seeing on our streets.
Maggie Vespa, thank you.
Mayor Ted Wheeler is heading to the protest tonight after an editorial called for him to step up and start listening. So what's his normally fiercely critical opponent think of that?
Well, welcome aboard, Ted. We'll be happy to see you.
When the story continues.
Welcome back to The Story. Hopefully you're chatting with us online using the hashtag HeyDan or emailing The Story at kgw.com. Lots to talk about. Let's keep moving. We got some unexpected news. I thought it was unexpected. Mayor Ted Wheeler says he plans to show up at the protest tonight. It's been a while since he's shown up to one, and his staff said he wants to talk to protesters and try and break the stalemate. Makes it sound so easy. We expect him to be on the corner of Southwest 3rd and Morrison near the Justice Center at 9 p.m. And that decision came pretty soon after the Portland Tribune published this editorial that we think is worth your time. It called on our state leaders to start leading and go out and listen to protesters and to come up with some sort of solutions to this nightly chaos. And that brings us to our quote of the day from the editors and directed at Portland City Commissioners. We are not calling on any of you to step down. We are calling on you to step up. The Tribune has a similar message for the police chief and the police union, saying that they're also leaders in this community who need to be part of this. Somebody with mixed feelings about Wheeler's appearance tonight is the woman trying to unseat him, Sarah Iannarone. Let's start with this tweet she sent out. Ted Wheeler coming to protest to de-escalate is as welcome and will probably be as effective as Donald Trump personally walking into the crowd. I will say her tone was a bit softer when I talked to her earlier this afternoon, when she basically said it's about time Wheeler got involved and she welcomes him. Iannarone is a regular sight at the protests, and she's a huge defender of them, even when things get violent between protesters and authorities. So I asked her about that.
Can we agree that the violence that we're seeing from protesters isn't just throwing bottles and spray painting? I mean, there are also other acts of violence. There's a video going around now where an officer was in the midst of detaining someone or arresting someone, and 3 or 4 protesters run over and tackle that officer and push him to the ground. Another officer comes to his aid and pulls his gun. I mean, that could have ended tragically. These are true violent acts, no? I'm not defending
Gestapo,
one side or another. But
and I want to be clear, though, and the reason that we had just talked about Gestapo-like tactics from Trump's secret police. We are out there worried that our friends and neighbors are being swept up by a federal government from which we may never be able to recover these people again. Without us being able to even track who's taking these people and how, I can see why if you had a colleague of yours in the streets scooped up by these people, you would fight to grip them back and hold them here in our community.
Why do you refer to them as secret police when we know that they're with the U.S. Marshals and Border and Customs and other federal agencies?
Because the lack of ability to track who's doing what where, the lack of accountability about what's happening on the other side of this, the lack of any recourse for Portlanders to be able to account for what's happening. Have we found out who was flying that plane overhead in Portland? Have we found out who's collecting data on our protesters and not? Who's conducting surveillance? Who's actually doing these things? We know that transparency from the Trump administration is about zero. We know that their credibility is zero. They are not trusted by the public. So why would we even believe what they tell us? So if you don't have trust and you don't have accountability and transparency, they can tell us anything we want, but how do we actually know?
If you don't know, but you said that you are wondering if the people who are being arrested or detained, if you could ever recover these people again. Did you mean that you don't know if you'll ever be able to see them again, as if they'll be vanished somewhere with no paper trail? Is that what you're insinuating?
I'm saying that may be what the people in the streets are responding to when they see that activity. You had asked me about the people who were responding to the law enforcement officer and that potential arrest, and in that situation. I was trying to say this is what I would imagine was going through their head at the time.
Do you think that sounds extreme a little bit, to think that U.S. officials or U.S. officers would be detaining someone to never be seen again with no paper trail?
I think you can look at the situation at our border in terms of disappearing people under the Trump administration and not call it extreme to say that we do not trust this administration when it comes to accountability and reliability and how we're going to be able to follow up.
Portland will decide between Sarah Iannarone and Ted Wheeler for mayor during the November general election. We are working on getting a one-on-one interview with the mayor because we have a lot of questions for him as well. In the meantime, we're going to post that entire interview with Sarah Iannarone to the KGW YouTube channel so you can watch it there. As you can tell, you saw the little flashes there. We had to edit it for time, but we spoke for a while, so hop on there and listen to what she has to say. You know, it's been busy. If we're just now talking about COVID-19 this late into the show, but today Governor Brown laid out some more guidelines on masks and gatherings. gatherings. See, starting Friday, kids as young as 5 need to wear a mask in indoor public spaces and outside when they can't keep 6 feet from others. The state still recommends kids as young as 2 wear masks, but it isn't required. Also, starting on Friday, indoor venues, restaurants, and bars are capped at 100 people statewide. They'll also have to end service by 10 p.m. But outdoor venues in Phase 2 counties can start to have up to 250 people. The Department of Education also announced that students and staff who do return to school this fall will be required to wear a mask. Now, we still don't know exactly what school is going to look like in this upcoming year, but Kristen Severance explains thousands of Oregon teachers are asking Governor Brown to agree to one thing before opening them up: no new cases for 14 days.
We found out about this group after one of its members reached out to the story, and now more than 9,000 people have joined, teachers, parents all across the state. The group is called Oregon for a Safe Return to Campus. Their message is clear: 14 days, no new cases before opening up schools. Not across the state, but county specific.
I mean, welcome to my classroom right now. I'm sitting in my kitchen.
Ian Maurer would love to be back in his old classroom teaching math at Cleveland High School in Portland. But those days are gone, and figuring out how to safely restart school is a question no one can seem to answer.
It's very hard to plan when you don't know what you're going to do in just a matter of weeks.
He and thousands of other teachers in the Oregon for a Safe Return to Campus Facebook group say in-person school should not happen unless one simple metric is met. What is the main message that you want to get out?
The main message is that 14 days of no new cases in a county ensures that it's safe for students to come back for face-to-face instruction.
There has been a big push to get kids back in some form this fall. The American Academy of Pediatrics encourages kids to be physically present in schools, saying kids are less likely to spread COVID and pointing to the importance of their educational and developmental needs.
You know, a lot of people are saying they want the kids back. The kids need to be back in an actual school building. What do you say to that?
I say we want the kids back too. I mean, honestly, my favorite part of the job is interacting with young people and getting to know them. And it is so hard to do that over a screen. But I want to point out that the school they would return to is not the same school that they were leaving in the spring. We're going to have masks, we're going to have distancing, we're going to have these complicated cohorts. So the school of the past is not what they would be coming back to. And I believe that people talk about mental health. It would be traumatic for a student to return to a school and then have it shut down, or even worse, have a peer or a teacher get sick and pass away.
I asked Governor Kate Brown about the 14 days no new cases push at a news conference, but she did not address the group's specific request.
They want, 14 days of no new cases before you would open up school. What do you think of this request?
So I will just say to parents across the state, school reopening is going to look different than it has in the past. And whether or not kids return to school buildings, we have to provide the best education to all of our kids, regardless of who they are or where they live in the state.
Maurer said for teachers, there is really nothing more important than figuring this out.
A lot of teachers, and this has come up in our group too, are buying life insurance. A lot of teachers are rewriting their wills. This is a very serious thing. And these are teachers who love their job and love their students and want to keep working with their students. But it's a really hard choice when it is, life or death decision that you're making.
All right, we're reading comments and looking through them now. We're going to talk a little bit more after the break when we finish the story. Keep using that hashtag, HeyDan. Man, I don't even know where to start. We're getting a lot of emails, a lot of people using the hashtag HeyDan, and I understand that there are a lot of emotions out there. Thomas writing in and saying, here's a tip for Dan Haggerty. Most people don't really care about all his BS about federal arrests. I don't know that I agree with that, sir. Isn't that a really big part of what's happening downtown? Federal involvement, the president's words about Portland, people pushing back. You people are lost in stupid left-wing fantasy world. We just want the protests to end because they actually constitute an attack on the functioning of our city. There is no constitutional right to permanently damage the Portland downtown. Stop media nonsense. We want our city back. No one's ever said that it is a right to be violent, that it's a right to assault people or to damage property. No one's ever said that. We're talking about solutions. The federal government seems to think force is the way to go, and the protesters have only grown in numbers. We're talking to our leaders. We're talking to people in the community. We want to hear solutions and ideas. We have the mayor who is out there tonight doing just that. So in return, we were talking to the person who's up against him in the race for mayor. We're trying to do the best work we possibly can to stay balanced, give you all of the information that you need. I don't really have much more to say. That's the story tonight. We got the news at 6:30 coming up next. Stick around for Laurel Porter. I'll see you tomorrow.